Arsenal and Liverpool are equal on points. Arsenal fan is Harry. Liverpool fan is me. And we're going to talk about the two of them. We're going to make a kind of a comparison. The biggest strength and the biggest weakness of each. So, Harry, Arsenal season ticket holder. We've probably been to every Arsenal home game. Do you think you can win the league in the current climate of, I think possibly most people perceive Liverpool and Man City to be the top two still? Do you think you can win the league? It's a big question to start. It's a big question.
It is a big question.
I haven't done this in a while, so we're
these are heavy-hitting questions. You've given me 30 seconds. Look, there's 10 games to go and we're top of the league, so it'd be pretty daft to sit here and say we can't win it. I don't think it's a fluke, the position we find ourselves in, given what we did last season, given how even in the tricky part of this season, we still, we're performing pretty well in pretty much every underlying metric you look at. We were kind of unlucky to be where we were. And they've since put together a very good run and made up the ground we kind of needed to, and it just goes to show we've had to win basically every game to claw back like 5 points or whatever the difference was, right? So we put ourselves in a sticky situation. We've kind of undone the damage of that tricky Christmas period, and now you're into the last sort of part of the season where you want to be in it with 10 games to go. You want to be playing in these big games in the league and in the Champions League, and ultimately in the position to sweep up at the end of the season. So, these are the times that we've long wanted at Arsenal. We haven't been in this, position. I know obviously with the end of last season we were in it with the league, but juggling on two fronts and playing in the biggest games every 3 days is not a position we've been in for, over 10 years. So it's exciting. And I think the sort of what I've seen online and people's reaction to sort of obviously the Champions League draw and the fact that we've got to play a lot of big games in April has actually been quite negative. And I do get it. It's kind of born out of fear, right? It's born out of anxiety where
the experience.
Last season, these experiences you have ultimately of missing out will lead to pessimism and negativity. So I do understand it, but you got to embrace it at the same time. Now, I'll be biting my fingernails against Man City and against Bayern Munich and against Spurs and like all these big games we've got to come. But we're here on merit, I think, is the thing to acknowledge. That the work across the season has led to us being in this position with 10 games to go. I think you're right to point out that the general kind of attitude towards the title race all season has been, it's Liverpool, Man City, and we've had to basically force our way into that conversation to kind of gate crash a little bit. But we've been every bit as good as those two teams, and actually you could argue better than them. We're top of the league at the minute, and I don't think it's a fluke that we're there. So big games to come, but absolutely we're right there where we want to be.
What is your biggest strength that has led you to that position? I agree, it's obviously not a fluke at all. What do you think your biggest strength has been?
I think control is the word that gets bandied about a lot when it comes to Arsenal and Mikel Arteta. I don't think it's any coincidence that it's a comparison you see a lot with sort of Man City and the way they like to go about, controlling football matches and, reducing the jeopardy that they face and ultimately the threat they're able to generate. I think across the season, there've been time, I think certainly earlier on in the campaign, we didn't strike the right balance between control and actually being a bit sterile and not generating enough threat. And I think what's been really good since the turn of the year, we've been scoring a lot of goals, right? Like it's well documented. And we've just it's not come at the cost of actually the threat we're limiting, defensively. We're hardly giving up any chances, really. If you actually go through every single game that we've played this year, I can't recall a single one really where we've given a lot away. And so I think control is a good word, but you've got to be careful sort of when you actually reference it, because it's also been kind of a weakness this season where we've I think when it's come at the cost of how we're able to attack our opponents. So I'd say the biggest strength at the minute is the balance we're able to strike between control and generating threat. Because you look at the other two teams we're up against, they're going to score a lot of goals. They're not going to give loads away either. Maybe not as little as we do, but it's not like they're chucking them in every week. So you've still got to be able to score goals. You can't win 1-0 every week. I think what we're doing at the minute with the players we've got, the system we've built, is we're able to play the majority of games in the areas we want to. We don't get dragged into basketball matches, and we're still able to score multiple goals every game. I think only the Champions League tie against Porto is the only time we've not scored more than once in obviously across the Premier League and Champions League in 2024. So we're still able to produce output, and it's not harming us at the other end, I think, which, is credit to the system we've built, is credit to those sort of defensive players. They've been very, very good this season. I think if you basically went through and asked an Arsenal fan, or actually, to be honest, most kind of neutral fans from the outside, who do you think Arsenal's best player this season has been? I think a lot of people would point to someone in that area, defensive area of the pitch. And so I think those guys have been the foundation, and across the season, and we're kind of building slowly, hopefully towards a sprint finish. We've been able to build in sort of trying to take games by the scruff of the net, generate more threat, and it's not come at the cost of obviously the defensive solidity that we've had all season.
Yeah, I think you talk about the kind of a weakness that may come up as you talk about control is the inability to score goals at times because of the over obsession with control. I think that's the general point you're trying to make. Then I looked at I have FB ref open, and then I looked at the number of goals, because I could have sworn you have the best attack in terms of number of goals scored. But
it's crazy, isn't it? Yeah,
it is. But because since the turn of the year, you've had 5-0. 6-0 against West Ham, a 5-0 against Burnley, and there was another game 6-0 against Sheffield United. So that 5 goals a game run, or let's say an average of 4.5 over 5 or 6 games, that has obviously contributed to those numbers.
It's boosted it massively.
Massively. And then the kind of run of games before that was, the 2-2 West Ham game, the loss at Fulham, these sorts of results. And I think the Fulham game was the one where that problem we talked about was really showing itself in terms of too controlling, very little actual chance creation. There was a lot of talk at the time about having an actual solidified goal scorer, someone who their role is to score goals, like Erling Haaland, Man City, arguably Darwin Núñez at Liverpool, that striker. That said, I would bet, if I was a betting man, which I'm not, that you would say something else other than too much control is your biggest weakness. So in terms of actual weakness that might hurt your title chances, what is it that may actually...
So I think it's something that actually, beyond tactics, beyond what you're seeing on the pitch, it's a longer standing concern I have with the manager and current group we've got.
Ooh.
And with the games we've got to come. I think it's his reluctance to shuffle the pack. And I think he's going to be forced into doing it with the fixtures we've got every 3 days. I just don't think it's going to be possible to roll out the same 11 to 13, if you want to call it that, every 3 days in this part of the season. I think he's going to have to use his squad. Now, at this moment of recording, we're working our way towards a clean bill of health. We should have most, if not all, players available for the run-in as things stand. Now, whether they're ready and up to speed, a few of them, it's still it's still to be decided. But I think you saw in the Champions League tie, the second leg, where on paper we actually had quite a good bench. We had, good options on there. But it was a tight, nervy game where it was 1-0 for a lot of it, and it sort of felt like next goal wins at either end.
Yeah.
And we made one substitution in 90 minutes, and I think he waited until, halfway through extra time to put a couple more on. I think they made 6 substitutes in that time, which obviously is what you're allowed. And I think that sort of encapsulated his reluctance to use players that aren't necessarily up to speed. And it's not always the same players. So if you actually look at it, for example, someone like Kivior, who wasn't in the fold until maybe 8 games ago, and then he's been playing relentlessly recently every single game and played really well, done a job for the team. But he's now, involved, right? So then he plays, and then we had 2 other left-backs on the bench, and he wasn't keen to bring them on because obviously they don't have the feel for the team and the system at that moment in time. So it can change quite quickly, but he didn't put him in until he was forced to use him, and then he used him and he's done well. So I think that is something he needs to become a little bit more comfortable doing with, multiple players across the squad, where use your squad before it becomes an issue, before players burn out, sort of solve the issue at source rather than, letting it manifest, letting it spread. And ultimately it becomes an issue when you're basically playing players and they're burnt out and they're carrying stuff and, they're not at full capacity, which I think in that busy Christmas period, I don't think it was a coincidence that was where we struggled most this season, when the games were coming thick and fast. And, he was trying to ultimately use a lot of the same players for a lot of those games. So that's something I think he's going to have to look at. And I think he's going to have to use his squad. So that's my biggest concern at the minute. Is he going to feel comfortable rotating, shuffling the pack, taking a bit of a risk? You've got a midweek Champions League game, you've got a league game, you've got one eye maybe on the second leg of a tie. Like, how are you gonna, shuffle and use players and maybe not try and use them in exactly the same roles as other players? Because I think he's a very kind of specific manager in terms of what he wants a player in playing in a certain position to offer. And the second you take that out, he's not always the best problem solver. And I think that's why he's very specific with, who he trusts at certain times. So that's where I would take it. Beyond, looking at any of the sort of like performances, what do I see at the minute? Like, there's not glaring weaknesses, of course. Like, you could point to stuff like I mentioned earlier, but really that's the thing for me. If we're being practical about it, you're probably going to get injuries. You're going to have a lot of games, is like fixtures coming out your ears every 3 days. I think basically in April we play every 3 days because of postponed games, because of the Champions League. And they're not easy games, so
or February
he's going to have to use his squad. So that would be my biggest kind of concern at this moment in time. Yeah,
the schedule's absurd, isn't it? You are spot on in terms of like the number of players used, because you have used the second least amount of players. Although, West Ham have used 24. Arsenal, Man City, Everton, Fulham, Wolves, Luton Town have used 25. Crystal Palace have used 26. Brighton 27. But with Arsenal and indeed Man City having the schedule that they are having, you would think you want to start to rotate in some more players, which we'll come to that in terms of Liverpool. Has actually been a real plus for us. The other question I had is, when is Julian Timber coming back? Just remembered him.
He's been training for a few weeks. I think it's unlikely he's going to trust him in any of the important games. I'd be absolutely amazed. Kind of speaking to the point I made a few minutes ago, like, I just, as good as he is and as good as he looked, he's not played all year. And coming back from an injury like that, to get up to sort of speed and intensity and obviously requirements of the system, and you're playing in some of the biggest games, ultimately the business end of the season, it's a huge ask. I think basically any significant minutes he plays, in my mind, are a bonus, but we should have enough cover in that position. We've got 3 left backs now. As I said, Kivior will sort of come into the fold and become an option there, and then you got Zinchenko and Tomiyasu kind of coming back. So it's not in a position where we're stretched super thin, but he did look really good. So I'd like it if he could play some part.
Yeah,
he's the one I'm kind of looking at and thinking I'd be surprised. But everyone else at the minute is fit. I think, barring some kind of, I think Liverpool, City and Arsenal are kind of all at it at the minute with the pulling players off international duty. Because I think they're basically, none of them are messing about. There's big trophies to be won. It's one thing doing it in, the September or October international break, but that March international break, if you look back over the years, Ferguson was the best for doing it. He would always get his important players out of that international break and make sure come that last 10 games down the stretch that they were ready to go. So, barring, any unexpected kind of actual injuries there, I think we're pretty much clean bill of health, and I think we're going to need it. So
yeah. To your point about left backs and Kivior playing, I think part of it is because Zinchenko has been just way off it, in my opinion. He has been the most unconvincing Arsenal player this season for me.
The system doesn't rely on him to the extent that it did, which I think actually, I think he's a player. Yeah, which I think, he was obviously very good last year, but we were so dependent on him and for sort of multiple reasons in that position. Whereas I think now, because the dynamics have changed a little bit, we're able to still, maintain threat without him. I mean, if you actually look into it, like, he does rank very highly in a lot of the things that are quite important. But I agree, like, sort of on the eye test, he's made mistakes that have cost us goals. And, we're at the crunch point of the season. Yeah, we're at the crunch point of the season. So, I think what we've been able to do in that position is good in terms of using other players there and not, completely falling apart. Yeah. I think there are still other players in other positions where I'm yet to see how we would cope without them. And that, for me, maybe is the kind of biggest concern. But overall, we're where we want to be. And this is where you've got to ultimately step up and deliver and learn from last season. Show that you've, taken what happened in that last 10 games last year.
Yep.
And at least, look, you can lose games. We've got some hard fixtures, no doubt about it. But what can't happen is the kind of mental collapse that did last year. We had absolutely no business dropping points in some of those games that we did.
Southampton 3-3.
Yeah. So this is where they've got to do better.
Yeah. All right, on to Liverpool. We talked about the use of the number of players used, and we only used 4 more players than Arsenal, but I think it's no secret that our squad depth has been very unexpectedly important for folks like Jadon Dance. Jadon Dance came in so suddenly that in the same month, in the goal of the month competition, he had a goal for the first team and a goal for the under 18s. At the start of the month, he scored a volley from 35 yards or something, and then he scored later that month against Southampton, was it? And both made it. And I remember watching that, and at the start of the month, it's like I had never heard of Jadon Dance ever in my life. I'd heard of Luis Kumas because he's someone that is quite good on Football Manager for lower league teams. Like, I'd heard of Mateusz Musialowski's the latest one. He's obviously been the one for some years, and then he's kind of gone quiet. And then he finally made an appearance in the Europa League. I think in any season, if you tell me that Mohamed Salah is going to be out for a month and a half without starting, I would tell you that there is no way Liverpool win the league. There's no chance. And that got compounded by the injury of Diogo Jota and the fact that we've had to play a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds at the oldest. And compounded by the fact that we basically had no fullbacks and had to recall Owen back to cover left back because Owen Beck is left back on loan at Dundee, came in January and then went back on loan because there was no Robertson or Tsimikas at the time. But then Joe Gomez covered that left back. Then we have to play Joe Gomez at defensive midfield because Ouattara got injured in the Carabao Cup final. Yeah, the amount of versatility that those players have shown and the kind of youth academy's ability to step up when, we had such an injury crisis at one point that it actually compares to 2021. The difference in the 2021 season being that the injuries were quite severe. So the injuries this season are kind of, Robertson is a couple games out, but at least there's Tsimikas. Or, Ouattara is going to miss a game. Or that sort of stuff. There's obviously been more severe injuries, like the Jota one, like the Mo Salah one. He was out for at least a month with that. But I think the real difference between 2021 or 2020, 2021 and this season is that the amount of youth academy players that we are able to get to, promote is much deeper. There's a much deeper pool of talent to use there. Obviously, in that 2021 season, there was the famous Reece James, Nat Phillips center back combo.
Yeah.
But for some time before that, we were playing Fabinho and Henderson as center back partners. So, this season we were straight away able to just promote Gerald Kwanzaa into the first team and he's had a real first team role. Like, he's starting against Man City and that sort of stuff. So definitely our biggest strength is the kind of depth of talent pool at the academy that we've been able to promote. I just can't wait for the next manager to come through and what they can do with that setup, because I think whoever comes in at Liverpool is actually incredibly lucky, because the health of the squad in terms of their longevity and the depth of the academy pool coming up is insane. I don't think any manager would be in a better situation coming into a first team of that level. But we have been able to use the academy and that depth of talent, and there's a lot more to the way we've used the academy and why we've been able to promote so many players. But I think what the mistake that came out of that is the amount of intensity we've played with. Maybe the thought there is that, we have enough in the squad that we can rotate against Man City and it not being a problem. But we played against was it Sparta Prague, Slavia?
Sparta Prague, yeah.
Yeah.
No, Sparta Prague.
Sparta Prague. My apologies. We played against them with way too much intensity. At the time I was watching it, I think we scored 3 goals in 7 minutes or whatever. And I'm watching it, and I'm just like amazed at the amount of intensity we were actually playing with. And I went, this is kind of a statement, like we're just taking every game seriously, and this is the level we're going to play at no matter what, which could be a good thing. But why? Why are we playing full throttle with Mohamed Salah starting for the first time since January the 1st for Liverpool at the time? And we had him play for 90 minutes, and we just ran them over for some reason. I don't know why. This could have been a game where you play the under 21 team and it not be a problem. Yeah. So looking back, I think we will regret the amount of intensity we played with, because it also meant that Salah didn't start against Man City, which I don't know why he played the 90 minutes against Sparta anyway. Maybe they thought in order to get him sharp enough, we want to play him 90 minutes. And then and then against Man City, he sits on the bench till 60-something minute. And then he comes on and he gives that pass to Luis Diaz, the one-on-one that was missed. So, in my opinion, we start Salah against Man City, we win the game. But it is what it is. And to that point, actually, I'll cheat a bit here and go the biggest weakness from the campaign is that we haven't won against either Man City or Arsenal. If you look at the past 2 seasons where we've had 2 close title races,
same thing, isn't it?
Exactly. It's the games against Man City, 18-19 especially. That 2-1 Man City win is arguably the most important game of the season, because it cut the lead at the time to 4 points. We were leading by 7, and then cut it to 4. If we draw that game, the lead is still 7 points, and it's still a little bit more comfortable. But then Man City are just perfect, right? And then the 21-22 season, that was arguably the worst, the more heartbreaking one, because we actually drew both times against Man City. 2-2 both times. Although a couple of Desmonds. And actually, I think Liverpool in both games, though, got away with a couple of dodgy card decisions that were given, like second yellows.
Three
of them in the 2 games. Milner and Fabinho, I believe it was. Although Man City should have gotten a second yellow card in the Etihad game, but I think we got away with a couple. But yeah, regardless, you have to win against your main title rivals, in my opinion, to win the title. And we haven't.
Interesting.
So I don't think we're going to win the league. I don't think we're going to win the league. Yeah, I think we'll win Europa, but not the league. Unfortunately. But, it's all right. It's all right. We've had so many injuries. It's absurd. Like I think we have no right to be here. I don't think any other manager than Jurgen Klopp would actually make that good use of
I agree with that.
They have.
I agree with that. And I actually think that I was saying this to someone the other day about Liverpool. I said I don't think at this point in time, I don't think at their best they're as good as City or Arsenal at their best. So I actually think if you get all 3 strongest starting 11s out there, I think we're slightly more refined, is my honest opinion. But what I do honestly think is if you take key parts out of the Liverpool team, the City team, the Arsenal team, I think Liverpool have shown that they can cope with it the best, which is actually really... It surprised me because I thought if you take Salah out, and you take Alisson out, and you take, obviously, Trent out, they're huge key players for these guys. They're match winners. But they've displayed a kind of spirit and togetherness, and ultimately they've showed that their system doesn't necessarily rely as much on key players as maybe if you take Rodri out of Man City, or if you take Saliba out of Arsenal at the end of last season, or if you took Declan Rice out or Saka out. Like, I think we would really struggle with the equivalent injuries. I think City have shown this season, if you take Rodri out, they've basically lost every game without him. So as good as they are, they're very dependent on him. And I think Liverpool, as you say, that what they've shown is they might not have any right to be here, but in a sort of tricky period where they've been missing key players, they played the cup final with basically half a team. They've managed to keep winning, and I think had Liverpool won that game last couple of weeks ago, I actually would have been really worried, because it's out of our hands, really, as far as Liverpool are concerned. We don't play them again, so it's not like we can, take points off them in the head-to-head.
Yeah, and the fact that we don't play either your Man City worries me. Yeah.
They've not been dropping many points. Like, we have won every game in 2024, and we're level with Liverpool, having beaten them, and they've drawn to Man City, and that's it. Like, it's the 2 teams that obviously it's in your hands to beat them, and they've dropped points against City again, missing players. Like, other than that, they've managed to just keep winning. So I would have been really concerned, and I still am to an extent. We're level on points. We've got harder games to come. I think. I know you've still got a couple of tricky away games, but we've got those. We've got to play City, which I think is just the hardest test in football at the minute, to go to City and win. And I think as much as you're pessimistic,
I wouldn't say pessimistic. I'd say in peace with the fact that we may not win it. I'm psychologically prepared. Having had the gruesome experiences of 2000 and was it 19?
Yeah. 1920. Yeah. I do get it. I do get it. I think City. Obviously, this is about Arsenal and Liverpool here. I think City have to go up a level, and they've shown they can do it in previous seasons. But I think that's the standard we're judging them on, rather than actually how they've been this season.
Yeah,
I don't think they've been as good this season, and I've sat here and said this before and kind of been burned by it, because they've then stepped it up. But this is kind of later in the season than in previous years it sort of would happen, January, February. It sounds weird because they haven't lost a game in 24, I believe. I don't think they've lost a single game.
The last game they lost was on December 4th, 1-0 to Aston Villa.
Yeah, Aston Villa. So yeah, I mean, I think they've demonstrated vulnerabilities in performance, but they've also been, they're unbeaten, as I said. So you are looking for things. You're squinting to see it with Man City every time. You are squinting to see weaknesses. But listen, I'm feeling better about that game next week certainly than I was last season. I mean, last season you just sort of knew we were going to go there and get flogged, which we did. But they kind of did it to everyone. They did it to Real Madrid. They did it to Bayern Munich. They were just beating everyone in that kind of last third of the season last year. I think we can go there and do something, and I think we'll probably need to. But there's still another 10 games. So you are into the last part of the season, but you've still got, like a quarter of it to play. So it's not like you're quite at the finish line yet. There's still a lot of football to be played. Yeah.
Harry, may the best team win.
May the best team win, mate.